Hang on, forgot my coffee. I'm surprised it still let it go. That's right. You have 40 seconds. Some of you don't want to see this. This is normal. Oh, only one left. Ibuprofen. No, not candy, but I forgot my coffee. I'll fill that later. As we get older, especially with Debbie, her arthritis is a little more advanced than mine. Probably, I'm going to say we've been running 5+ years apart. And when our arthritis hits, the only problem is for me, it can hit on both. But still, I think in a lot of ways, that was one of her choices to marry somebody. And some of you are going to say, well, that's awful. Not really. Why? Because it has to be somebody that loves her, that's going to want to continue to assist her for the rest of her life. In the end of both of our lives, the second half, I should say, not the end. So it's one of the things. What am I on today about? Well, you've got 40 seconds of empty screen, and I'm going to answer for that when I put up the note there. We've got these little pilots that I got yesterday from some company called Prads Tech or something like that. Because of the centers in each end, I'm assuming he made it on a small lathe. It looks like they're okay, but I haven't measured them yet. Let's find out. I forgot. I brought in one of my calipers. Okay, this one is labeled what? 5mm. Now, it may or may not be 5mm here, and it should be above 5mm here. So let's see what we got. Let me come down here to start out. Now, as funny as it may seem, wipe your jaws every time, okay? All right. Now, run it back on electronics, run it back and forth a couple times. Make sure you're coming up with the same number. Now you have to get to the same. Okay, now here's what I have. Minus 0.1. Okay, that means it's on millimeter. So we will convert it to inch. Okay, inch. It flashes back and forth a little bit between minus and 0. It still means it's off, but it's off the scale. All right, there we go. Now, why do I double zero it? Well, because if you don't, you get this. You're exercising the unit too. All right, because what's on one is not necessarily the other. All right, good. Now we're going to start at 0. On the bottom here, 4.98, 4.97. Middle, 4.97. Yes, it's up. Oh, turned to 500. All right. As soon as I let go, well, what do we got? 498. Okay. Just a little bit less, but up here should be, wow. There it is. See if it'll stay. No, it won't. All right, hang on. Because it is making partial sense, and I wanted to be sure on this. Okay, I'm going to lock it. That's what the top screw here is for. Going to pull it out. 502. 5.02. What does that mean in English speak? Well, I'll hit the conversion for the fun of it, but 0.1985. 1975. Came up 198 at first. Funky things happen when you change your conversions. Okay, now, if you want to play the thousandths game, how much of a taper is this? It isn't enough. It's not that much, but it is some. Okay, now if I have 5mm, May have to pull out my phone, but let's play it this way. 0.03937. Okay, I've always played it by 40 thousandths, and in general, it works. So if I have 1 millimeter, it's 40 thousandths, or 0.039, just under. All right, so if I have 0.1, it's 1/10 of that. Okay, so now you're talking 0.0039. That's why we rounded up to 4. So it'd be 0.004 is 1, correct? 1 millimeter, or 0.1 millimeter is roughly 4 thousandths. We would round it off to that in general, wouldn't we? You have 0.003 is 3 thousandths. You have 9 after it, you're talking 10 thousandths. It makes very little. It can make a difference, racing and other things. Antiques and street stuff, generally, no. So we're going to play with that one that way. So I got 0.0. All right. And if you have 0.0, that means nothing. Of course, now we've gone from 40 thousandths to 4 thousandths, now to 2. Get my drift? So it is a little bigger than 5, but not by a lot, is it? Each one is 4 thousandths at 0.1. This is 0.01 for 10 thousandths. So there's like 8. Roughly, there's a thousandths difference between the end here, or between the actual measurement, what it's supposed to be 5 millimeter, and what is on this end, 0.498 or 4.98. Let's play the game the other way. I'll switch units, and in this case I don't need to zero it. On the end here, 0.196. You have to read it upside down. 0.196, and here at the top, 0.197, roughly. So there's 1 thousandths difference between top and bottom. Should be more. So I'm going to have a problem with these puppies. From here to here, it should be 5 millimeter. Or just maybe a little below. But still, that's what it is just a little below. Up here, though, being just barely over, there should be a little more than a few thousandths. There is 2 thousandths difference between the two. But the problem comes up in... Oops. There's no way to get just a thousandths or so in there. 196, convert it. 4.97, 4.98 in that neighborhood. So the difference is probably near minimal. And I may have problems with it now. However, the good part is there's also 5.5 is in here. And so is 6 and 6.5 and 4 and 4.5. The only one that doesn't have anything that I'm going to need different of is 7. Now, why do you put a 7 in without a 7.5 is beyond me. What does 7 figure out to? Double check again. There you go. 0.274. So in other words, the bottom of this, even though it's 7 millimeter, yeah, they did a poor job on these. So 1 thousandths difference top to bottom. What is 1/4 inch? 0.250. This is 0.275 average. So we're not talking what I would like to talk as far as that goes. What is, well, 5/16 is 3/12. So now you're in the neighborhood of 9/32 roughly at 7 millimeter. So, and it's probably in the ballpark, and I believe in my old stuff I do have 9/32. Why do I do that? Well, in my kits, with the pilots, I quite often, when you go to 3/8, you're in the 9.5 millimeter category. You really are. So why would, well, if you have 9.5 and 3/8 tucked together, you're going to have to fish through it. It's a problem because now you have 8 pilots in there usually. Somewhere between 6 and 8, and you're fumbling. Well, you fumble with them anyway. And if you have as many for 3/8 as you normally would, like I would for antiques, you've got 372, 375, or 372. In some cases, I even have 371, I think. I bought the rebuilder set. So it's 371, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You heard me right, 7. You say, well, that's worn out. Not on all specifications. And not all of the valves are done as the valve itself. And that's right. Anything below 373 is a waste of time in American world. The guide is bored 375. 3/8 of an inch. Sort of. There are those companies out there, the rare few, that their valve will be 374, 375. And some of them have oversized. So 5 thousandths oversized, you're going to be 378 in that neighborhood, 77, 78, 79. Get my drift? So that's why we have in the rebuilder set from back when I bought it 30 years ago, or nearly 30 years ago, was one of the last rebuilder sets that they had at Newway, and that's why those are in there, was the selection to have, and a more accurate selection to have as far as cutting your seats is having the tapered guide similar to this that you would put into the valve guide. You'd put the pilot in there and lock it in place, and then you know that it's locked at the top. Well, then you have to be sure that your guide is serviceable. That's why I don't think that this is as good as I had hoped. So if the 100 series has expanding pilots, I'll be getting them probably in the future. But if they don't, well, I'll slowly buy what they have. But the idea here is that when you go, your valve guide is often hourglassed. Okay? Wide by the valve, and sometimes wider at the top. But at the top, there's usually a little oil, but where the rocker arm and the tip of the valve is. And the rocker arm tends to, depending on the angle, tends to push. If it comes down parallel, all it does is pull it in. If it's above, I should say perpendicular. If it's above perpendicular, then as it goes down, it pushes out. And as it goes below perpendicular, it pulls back. Now, if it does it evenly, then it takes the wear on either side of the guide. And then you have to have a good oil and a good resurfacing on the valve tip and the rocker tip to make it worthwhile. Now, if you've ground them both off, I would also suggest polishing them so that they can slide, but they will wear themselves in after hopefully a short period of time. But if you have poor oil, you'll wear it out. So what are you going for? The top by the tip of the valve isn't that much of a problem. The bottom by the head of the valve is, and as this is wiggling up here, it's going to do this, plus you have the heat and the wear on the bottom end, or on the head end anyway. So that tends to wear a little bit more than even the top. The tapered pilot might even go in there and lock in the center of the valve, and your basic valve train center is going to be good because they're set up from Newway better than these. But I paid 1/10 of what I would have from Newway on these guys. So I figured I'd try it. 1/10 versus the whole bunch being $60, $70, and $60 a piece from Newway. Doesn't mean Newway's wrong. It just means now I know why you pay the money. So these things aren't as they're supposed to be. Let's put it that way. But they're close. They're in that framework. But like you said, if you're talking, if you got 4 thousandths and it's loose, you got to put 4.5 in. Well, what's 4.5? You know, you're talking considerable amount more, but you might be able to get in there deep enough to run your cutter. So you may have a 5mm valve guide, and you might end up using the 5.5mm in there. I have the other set. They're larger, but the top end of these for the big cutters is 3/8. And bottom end of this is someplace in the neighborhood of 9/32. So, you know, the size difference is there, so you can run the smaller cutter to cut the valves. You're running the proportionately sized equipment in your valves to cut your valve seat. That's all I can say there. They used to have something before the Gizmatic to resurface valves that would take smaller valves for the lawn and garden world. Most often what we used to do in the 80s was just plain replace the valves. For crying out loud, the valves were $5 or $10 a piece. To do a valve job when your shop rate's $30 an hour, bang, 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 and maybe just a lot of guys wouldn't even cut the seat. They just lap them in, throw it in, and ship it after they set the lash. Excuse me. Now, for you antiques out there, the guys that are in the 50s, 60s, 70s, you take it in there, and on a tune-up, you're complaining because they charge you way over $100 for a tune-up. And you're griping and moaning. Shut up and listen. I understand the griping and moaning, but it's from ignorance. Please hear me out, because I do it here for myself. The first one was a Briggs & Stratton generator, 3,500 watt, that we bought here years ago for a tree that fell in the house, and they refused to hook the electricity back up when it tore the wires down. So what do? We shut everything off. Well, we shut off the main breaker, and then I hooked into an outlet and charged the entire house. I had a welder outlet, hooked right into it, fired up. So I was able to backfeed the system and still run it. And when I got to the end, I ended up adjusting the valves on that thing a couple times in its life before the generator section crapped out, and I got a beautiful running engine and a generator that puts out 100 volts. And it's not the capacitor or the regulator. Put in a brand new one, same result. Brush is fine. Yeah, I've been down this road. And to find any other information on this rig is stifling. I couldn't find a thing. Why? Mitsubishi built it for Briggs. Briggs went through a restructure. I reset the valve on that after probably half a dozen oil changes. And you'll say, what? It's a pull start. Reset your valves. And sometimes there's stuff that has to come out of the way to do that. It's not hard. It's easier to reset the valves than it was on the old girls. The old girls, you used to be able to do it assembled. And on the old girls, we used to have a problem where you put the valve in, grind the tip of the valve off, put it back in, got it perfect, and then you put the spring on. Even after you banged it, you put the spring on, you lost the thousands. The thousands is pretty critical in some cases. Well, on the exhaust, it's for your compression relief on some of the engines. On a Briggs & Stratton Easy Spin, it's on the intake, whether the Easy Spin even works or not. And some people used to open the intake valve tappet gap from the 5 to 7 thousandths it wanted to 10, so the Easy Spin would just barely burp. It pulled over harder, and it put out more torque. In some cases, they started better. Sounds weird, but the Easy Spin worked excellent. What the Easy Spin idea was to bring it all the way around, and to, as it's coming up on compression, you've gone on intake, don't let the valve close completely. Just have a hair's breadth, 2 or 3 thousandths off the seat, so it can actually back blow slightly and reduce the compression. And the engine's running so fast that it has nothing to do with the intake valve whatsoever as far as the intake valve's operation. The pressure builds up so fast it can't get through that little gap in there fast enough to make a difference. However, for those of you that don't ever adjust your valves, don't ever check it, you'll be pulling it over and you hear this fluff, fluff, fluff coming out the intake. It can be a loose I shouldn't say burned valve, but a bad valve, bent valve. It could be a loose valve seat like a lot of you would suspect, or it could just be the tappet gap is so close the valve never shuts properly. Stays open too far too long because it hammered itself down in. And this is on a flathead. Okay? Now, some of you can reach in there and file the tip of that valve, and sometimes you can, but you want it as straight as possible. Otherwise, you're just cocking the thing all day long. You're going to end up with another problem in the aluminum blocks. So, but that's why you go after it. The old ones, we hardly ever had to. There's no reason to until the engine started getting bad enough and fluffing back through the carburetor. So every oil change, nobody ever checked them. I used to, and the boss got mad. 2 bosses in a row. Finally, I gave up. And some guy many years later says, why don't you check tappet clearance? I said, bosses have screamed about it for the longest time, so I don't. If it's me, I do. If it's them, I don't. And as I got older, I started doing things more my way. And they said, why? I said, because my name's on it as much as yours is. My reputation's on it as much or more than yours is. I'm the guy turning the wrenches. I'm the one responsible. When it goes out that door, I want it my way, not your way. And they got a little angry about that. They said, you got an attitude. It's my business. You do it my way. I said, if I absolutely have to, sure I will. Sign it. They won't sign their name to it. That's why they wanted my name on it. And that was without fail over the last 40 years. Never was special instructions given without my name being applied to it instead of theirs. Always deniability. Cowards. So you fight. Why? Because you may end up unemployed anyway. And when you're unemployed, you don't want the person thinking, well, I'm not going to call them. Look how they treated me over there. Of course, there's some that you wanted them to think that, but you know what I mean. So anyway, that's why it costs so much. Just even with the old flatheads, we should have checked valve tappet clearance more often. It's too easy to fix. No, it's not perfect, but you can lift it, file or sand it off on one side. It wouldn't have been that hard. It really wouldn't. So the tip is fairly soft. File off a thousandths or half a thousandths. Check it again. Get it in the gap range so the thing performs better. It's going to hammer down in on a flathead. No. Occasionally you'll get them where the tappet end wears instead, but it was pretty rare. And occasionally you get one where there's so much dirt that the lifter tappet would pound its way into the tip of the valve. Rare, but they did. That's why you check them. So, well, what do you do if it's too wide? You can tear it apart and do a valve job. Even with a new valve, sometimes it's too high. You have to grind the face of the valve off. Or cut the seat in deeper. But when your tappet gaps are correct, it was like 5 to 7 intake and I think 6 to 8 exhaust on the Briggs. So you set everything to 7 and you're in a good category for everything to work properly. I also found out that this is aluminum block, of course. I also found out that on the new overhead valve engines, the same 5 to 7 gap goes almost all the way through the entire line from the teeniest little 2 or 3 horse Honda all the way on up through to a Deutz diesel engine. You can put 7 thousandths almost the entire way, but some of the smaller Hondas, them little guys, you can run them on 7 and they'll work fine. But they usually want to be about 4, them little bitty engines. Now, why so tight, even on the diesels? Well, the Deutz had aluminum head. Catch my drift? Aluminum expands, push rod goes up, push rod has to go a little farther to make the valve open. So you always start out with a stone cold engine, adjust them 5 to 7. When it warms up, you're 10 thousandths or more. So that's why it was so tight there, and it's why on Briggs and Strattons and all the others, you look at them and almost everything is right around the 7 thousandths mark. 5 to 7 is a pretty good guessing range for almost all of them. What was it on this last one? A Loxin engine, a Chinese engine branded Toro, was what was it? 6 to 8 on one side and 5 to 7 on the other. Essentially, they wanted 6 on the intake and 8 in the exhaust. That was their kind of their center limit, if I remember correctly. Well, it was tight. Why? They probably put the thing together in a warm factory, right? I'm out here in stone cold 30 degrees. When I was checking it, 35, somewhere in there. Everything shrinks down. So I open it up, get my 6 and 8 thousandths, fired her up, running beautiful. I mean, barking beautiful. It has more power now than it's had in the last 2 years. And it ran fine the last few years. It starts even better. We're talking, I opened up the gap 3-4 thousandths. When you're only 7 thousandths, 6 and 8, so say 7 thousandths median, and you're opening things up 3 and 4 thousandths, it'll make a huge difference, especially on your compression release. When it opens and when it closes, big difference. And your valves, when they open and when they close. And when it warms up, it expands, it's going to get loose. Well, it would have gotten looser with the smaller figures, correct? Yeah, but it's designed to start at these figures and then run better as it warms up. So it's critical how you set them at first. Excuse me. Now, you'll have to go back a couple of years. Steve Morris engines, and there's somebody else that did it, but Steve Morris in particular, when he's running engines on the dyno. You're talking aluminum block, aluminum heads. So we're in the same sphere of materials. And not the same type of animal, but overhead valves, push rods. Okay. He's talking drag and drive, so he isn't getting off of the standard fare roller. Some of the small engines have roller lifters. So go listen to Steve talk about valves and valve adjustments. And when he's on the dyno, they will actually start with a basic setting that everything has worked for him. They'll check it hot and cold. He's got the engineering stuff all in his head or written down or in the computer somewhere. But he will tell you that there are times in the dyno where they'll tighten down. They'll take a thousandths or 2 thousandths and tighten them up on the valves until suddenly, all of a sudden, it seems like something's not quite right, and then they'll back off. They'll gain horsepower and then back off by having the proper setting. But in their case, they're doing it with different lifters, different block, different heads, different roller rockers, everything different. And they're trying to find out what works best on the horsepower. And there's another company, if you go into, that studies the harmonics of the engines, where they'll actually change the size of certain parts of the engine to prevent vibration and float. They'll run it through an RPM range and test the harmonics. From crankshaft and valve train especially is even more critical than the rest of it, by how much that bump stick sends those push rods up. In which you're at a particular RPM, does that RPM match the harmonics of the push rod? So the push rod starts to vibrate when within its natural environment. It's no longer a substantial push rod. So it's ineffective at this point because it's jittering, right? It's not going to function properly. Might even be compromised to a point where it'll flex. So they're studying this to get it out of there, especially all the way up to the valve springs, because it'll carry from here through that into the valve spring and the valve itself, how it opens and closes. They already know that there's a problem studying the valves bouncing off the seats when they're running 7, 8, 9, 10,000 RPM. We're talking small engines here that like to run at 4,000, 3,850, 3,600. You look at your Briggs and Strattons of the past, they're rated at 3,600 RPM. And you sit there and look, and they say, well, set it at 3,600. And I asked what first place I worked at, why? I said, what do you mean? Well, what's the upper end? 3,600. It's rated at 3,600. Yeah, just set it at 36. Don't worry about it. And I do some studying later and find out that some Kohler and Briggs and Strattons are actually supposed to be set at high free idle 3,800. And some Kohlers 4,000 because they're rated at 3,800 or 4,000. Now they're 4,200. You get my drift. They need luggability, RPM range. So yeah, we were setting them at 3,600. The fallacy of it was some of the Briggs had running up here at 3,600 and their actual power band was 28. That's where the peak torque was. So I used to cut them back 3,200 RPM on a lot of bigger motors. Your walk behind rotaries, that's a whole nother ballpark that are direct driven. You got to keep them up there, 3,400, some 3,200 to 3,600. You have to have them up there for the blade to work right. Oh, they'll work down below, yes. Don't tell me. Yeah, let's not get into that stupid argument. Toro tried 28 and 2,900 RPM. It failed miserably. Why? Because they didn't have enough torque coming out of the engine and enough blade to make up for the RPM difference. Blade tip speed is what cuts on a rotary. It's not working like a shear. It's a hack. So, what are you saying? You get off the... Yeah, I did. I got off the beaten trail to get you into how many things are affected by something as simple and as stupid as resetting your valves. And the old guy that's sitting there saying, you charge $100 for a tune-up? And hopefully, the one behind the counter and the boss is standing there. If the one behind the counter has enough pull, you betcha I did. Let me show you why. And if you can't, and it's a young'un and you've just started to abuse him, hopefully the boss comes out and says, do you have a discrepancy we need to discuss? Please come into my office. I'd be more than happy to show you what we've done. I'll show you on the list here and we'll talk about it, and then I'll take you out and show you your lawnmower. Don't be the dismissive, business-owning jackass manager and a worthless turd. Get your butt out there and show him why he's paying $100. Nobody ever questions new equipment prep, do they? They're all giddy with new paint. Well, now you have to show them. Hopefully you've been smart enough to show them the list before you even started. So you can pick from one of our categories here, and if we find a problem, we'll call you. They say walk behind's not worth it. Exactly. So then you, as the manager and owner, need to make a decision. Are you just going to do it and mark it as done as a freebie? We adjusted your valves for free because they weren't operating properly and it wasn't part of the package, but we were the ones that are easy to get at, we were able to get at it and adjust them. You say, that's like, yeah, it's a brown-nosing, butt-kissing point. Sure it is. You charged them $100. Give them something. Just saying. Why not? And for you, the customer, maybe you decide, I'm not paying that kind of money. I'll adjust my own valves. Excuse me. If you've never adjusted valves before, don't ever. You said it's not that critical. No, not when you know what you're doing. Changing spark plugs, for crying out loud. Easiest thing in the planet. Use the wrong socket, wrong torque, wrong spark plug, wrong wrench. Catch my drift? There's some of the engines I've been working with here recently. I forgot the name of the other one. LCH or LS, whatever it is, another Chinese engine. You have to use a wobble on your extension to get it, the spark plug socket down in there to get it out. You can see it clear as day. You can't get to it. Not even with a flex ratchet. Argue with me all you want. There's just some things that have to happen and take time. So if you don't have the equipment, and dare I say the skills and ability, don't. Pay somebody to do it. Or better yet, it's a small engine shop. Maybe you can pay somebody to show you. They aren't going to want to. And some might. Follow the instructions. Online here, there's quite a few manuals available through Briggs & Stratton and other companies on here. Where do you think I found the ones for the Loxon and the GH or whatever the other engine was? One of them's on a pump and the other one is Loxon is on the my Toro. So there's Chinese engines all over. We just have to get over it. Why? No, because Briggs & Stratton went belly up. These would have been Briggs engines. And nobody wants to pay Honda's money. So the technology is scooted out. And it's not that hard. Go online, look these companies up, and put the numbers into the search bar. That's how I found out the Toro was a Loxon. I kept putting in 120 something or something, and all of a sudden Loxon came up. Went into Loxon, found out it's a G120 something, L or whatever. And then when I started looking at the dimensions and the horsepower and the ratings and such, it was in the ballpark, the size of it, the dimensions. And I was able to cross it over to, this is my engine. A 120-038. Well, it's a G120. And then I look at how it's built and designed, it's a Loxon. No doubt in my mind about it. So I went with the adjustments because they were close enough to what I expected. 6 and 8. I figured on adjusting them to 7. I would have been fine. So anyway, that's something to think about, that I've had 40 years of experience playing with these things to understand it, passing it on to you. And it's free, but I have to sit here in the house and do some other stuff anyway. And I thought, you know what? Go talk to the people about your new toys and adjusting their valves. Now, why don't I do this in a demonstration with a camera and all that like all the other fancy guys? Because it's meaningless. It's totally meaningless unless you do your own, because it's your engine. If I pop open somebody that has a, what's Honda's, G100 Honda engine, it's a belt drive overhead cam. Rubber belt drive in the oil, cogged belt overhead cam. It's miserable to adjust them on the tampers that those things are on. But I've done it probably half a dozen times to a dozen. Made a complete different engine out of the little bugger. And I went online and searched the specs. I think it was 4 or 5 thousandths for the little turd. Ran beautiful. And again, most of them tightened up. Some loosened. It's not like the old engines where most of the time they loosened and sometimes they tightened. Yeah, it can happen both ways. Your tractor engines, that's why we used to run them in. You get done running the thing around the block, up and down the street, and all over the place, bring it back in, let it cool, readjust your valves. And they say, you adjust them hot. No, you're an idiot. It's, well, it says in the book, hot, all 12 thousandths. Great. Let it cool down, adjust them to 14 or 15, all the way across the board, and leave it alone. Well, no, because when you start, it's going to be one temperature where you start. By the time you're done, it's going to change. Stupid. Yes, because if you're arguing with me like that, you are stupid. It'll change. They used to tell us, test your compression in a diesel engine fully warmed up. And then they sent me up on the hill in 10-degree weather with a 20 to 30 mile an hour wind to test compression in a hole on the west side of a hill. You catch my drift? We fired it up and started, and by the time we got done, the numbers were all different because the engine was stone dead cold. We had to remove the entire top end off to even get the injectors out to start doing the test. So what do? Put it all back on and fire it up and run it, warm it up again, take it all back off 6 times? No, we didn't. As the numbers changed, we took note. And when we got done, we noted how much they changed from hot to cold. And then we also noted how much they changed between each other. And when there was a gradient that we could follow that was consistent, up or down, usually down, then we knew that we could average it. And when we could average differences from temperature, then we could average differences across the board 10%. If all of them were within 10%, it was a moot point anyway. But that's why I say that you might as well do this stuff cold and get used to it. I say this at home, and to you that are professionals, that's not the way, you're a moron. Do it your way. I don't care. I frankly don't. Now, if you got a little 4-cylinder engine, you're in a nice warm shop, warm the thing up, get everything open, drive it in the shop, shut the door. Hopefully you've got the hood and everything else off by now. So all you have to do is pop and go. Maybe. Yeah. But 6-cylinder, don't even waste your time. V8, oh, please. No. So those are my recommendations for today, especially you at home. Take your time. Learn. Get the book and read. Not that hard. Briggs & Stratton, you can still get them on Amazon. Some of their old mechanics books, they're better than going to a mechanic school to learn gasoline 4-cycle engine theory. And they say, diesel's so much different. No. It isn't. There's no carburetor. No, but the 4 strokes are identical. The only difference is ignition. Compression, of course, but some of the older engines are not even hardly compression. A flathead averages about 7 to 1. Overhead valve is right around 8.5 to 9.5 to 1. Sometimes 10. On a gas engine, on the diesel, some of the old ones, 13.5 to 1 on some of the old power cells and pre-combustion chambers. So even the compression in the past hasn't been that much different. Today, yeah, they're running 17, 18, 19, 20, as high as 25 to 1 compression ratios. It seems astronomical, and it is. But still, it's the same function. The only thing that actually fully changes other than compression ratio is how it's ignited. Well, one is spark ignition, the other is compression ignition. And when you go to look at your engine oils, you'll see SJ or SG or SM or S whatever on the way up through for your oil grades. That's spark ignition, SL at L grade, maybe L4 or M4 or whatever. You'll look at the other one next to it, and some of them will have 2 listings, and the other one will be C, CJ4, CK, CK4, compression ignition. They used to have a different rating. It was because they were both pretty much the same oils. It was almost all M, but they have ML, MM, and MS. Service L light, medium, MM, and then MS severe. That's it. That's all I used to have. Then that changed. So, and it changed about the time I was a little punk that a guy was teaching me to go for MS oil and all of it. Never go non-detergent on any engine ever. Yeah, but no. If you want to run it, that's your thing. Tell you a story. Braking oil, SBSC grade. Guy told me to put it in this diesel engine or gasoline engine. So spark ignition, right? He used to pay extra money to buy this barrel of oil, hundreds of dollars back in the early 80s. And we put it in a gasoline, 100 horsepower Waukesha engine and a Massey Ferguson 1100. We didn't get 4 hours on it. I think it was 2.5 hours, took out a main bearing. Never use non-detergent oil in anything. It was a break-in oil used in the original Continental engines back in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And the idiot was stuck in his ways, didn't learn, forced me to put it in again. I said, well, it's your engine, but that's stupid. The engine builder told me run X. I asked him specifically. It's none of his business. He's warrantying the engine. I left before I got fired at that place. He ran out of people. So don't read the directions, okay? And you're going to run into the problem that I did with oil. And this is another thing that affects these valves and adjustments too, is oil. That's why I'm spending so much time on it. Changing it often, that's your filter. The stuff settles into the base. Change it. Change it when it's warm. It's better, yes, no doubt. But it'll still work when it's cold. Just keep changing it regular. But I've run into it with this Toro said synthetic 5W30. You go back to the manufacturer, synthetic or normal oil, doesn't matter, 10W30. Year round. The same grade range. Funny thing is, because it's on the snowblower, I trust both. But I had 10W30 synthetic. Love synthetics, and don't tell me they'll kill the engine. No. Something else will first. Why? 1972 Kohler. I've been running that for almost 20 years at 10W30 synthetic. Catch my drift? 1954 Ferguson TO35 synthetic oil. Almost its entire life, 10W30. Almost. It's a few times I couldn't afford it. All right? You're starting to get the pattern here. Generators, 10W30 synthetic. Year round. Lawnmowers, Snapper, 11.5 horse Briggs & Stratton overhead valve, 10W30 synthetic, almost 15 years. John Deere B, I usually run 1540 because it had a little help wearing out from an idiot. And another one is Case. It's old. Case is known for low oil pressure anyway, and I tend to run that thing. The Ferguson I've played with, 15W40, 10W30, synthetic, non-synthetic. I get the same oil pressure range no matter what I do when I'm pulling and working it, so it doesn't matter. The Case, it tends to make a little bit of a difference, but that runs 15 pounds oil pressure no matter what happens. So I can run 10W30 standard or synthetic in it. It doesn't care. The John Deere B, I have run it in there, and it seems to make a slight difference. Not that much. But it does on oil burning and other things. The heavier grade oil doesn't flow past the pistons when you're going downhill. That's why they have a second ring on these lay-down motors on the bottom end of the piston to scrape the oil back out when you're splashing and splashing around. They don't have proper baffling. Yeah, it's important. So those are things to consider when you're looking at it. But follow the recommendations. Go online and look them up. Call your dealer. Make a comparison if you're paranoid. And if you come up with the same numbers the whole time, hey, look, that works. And almost all of your overhead valve engines, small engines, are 10W30 synthetic or standard oils. And you'll see some that say, I want a 10W40. Well, if you can find it, put it in. Who cares? And you'll find some of them that have the exact same range, 10W30, 10W40, the exact same temperature range here, especially in the Northeast. So do your research, and you'll enjoy your life. Adjust your valves, and usually you only have to do that once, maybe twice in a life if you have a long engine life. Even time will affect it just sitting. It's worth it to run the buggers, because sitting means things dry out. When you're fired up, you get more wear from sitting and restarting. Restarts are where cars, everything, restarts are what is hardest on any engine. That's why a lot of these newer oils, the engines are made tight, the oils are made thin to shoot them through the engine as fast as humanly possible. Minimize wear. So, there it is. Killed off enough time, 45 minutes. You have a good day.